Have you ever felt like everything around you is falling apart, yet somewhere deep inside there's a strange sense of calm? Maybe you're tired, not just physically, but existentially, exhausted from playing roles that no longer fit, from pretending that this version of you is still alive. What if I told you that this moment of collapse is not the end, but the beginning? That what you're experiencing now might be the unmistakable signs of an inner rebirth, a passage into the best stage of your life. That's what we'll uncover in this video. Have you ever felt everything around you collapse, while something inside you whispered, "Let it"? Not just the external chaos, but the internal unraveling, identity, certainty, the sense of who you are. It feels like failure, like falling apart. But what if I told you this collapse is sacred? This is not your undoing, this is your becoming. What you were experiencing is what Carl Jung called the necessary disintegration of the persona, the socially adapted mask you've worn to be accepted, loved, and understood. That mask is now cracking, and beneath it, something ancient stirs, something real. When the breakdown begins, it doesn't ask for permission. It arrives disguised as exhaustion, sudden emotional surges, disillusionment, or an unbearable stillness. The life you've meticulously built starts to feel foreign, empty, performative. And you start asking questions you once buried beneath achievement, busyness, or approval. Who am I when I'm not being useful? Why do I still feel invisible? Why does everything that once mattered suddenly feel hollow? What's crumbling is not your life. It's the false structure you built around it. The ego is losing its grip. The persona is losing its script. And you are standing in the ruins, terrified and free. Most people run from this moment. They panic, patch the cracks, distract themselves, rebuild what was even if it was killing them, but you're still here, listening, feeling. And that means something inside you is ready. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. This moment is sacred precisely because it feels like death. Because in a way, it is. The death of control, the death of needing to be understood, the death of an image you've outgrown. But from that death emerges a deeper voice, one that's been buried beneath compromise, shame, and silence. This breakdown isn't a failure of your strength. It's the first sign of your truth trying to breathe. And the pain? That's the friction between who you were pretending to be and who you truly are. You've outgrown your mask, and your soul is demanding space. So if everything feels like it's falling apart, let it. Because what will remain is real. What will rise is you. In the next chapter, we'll witness the moment your ego takes its last breath, and what happens when you no longer recognize who you used to be. Let's keep going. Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were staring at a stranger? Not because you've changed physically, but because something inside you no longer fits the reflection you've lived with for so long. That quiet unease, that internal friction, it's not confusion. It's your ego preparing to die. This is the moment few people talk about, yet almost everyone eventually meets. A moment where your thoughts, your ambitions, your very identity begins to feel foreign, artificial, even absurd. You're not crazy. You're waking up. And the part of you that's panicking? That's the ego fighting for air. Carl Jung taught that the ego is necessary. It helps us function, navigate, survive. But when it mistakes itself for the whole self, it becomes a tyrant. And right now that tyrant is gasping because it knows that you are beginning to see through its game. You've lived through its rules. Be strong, be liked, be in control, be impressive. Don't be too much. Don't be too weak. Don't show your need. You performed, you perfected, you survived. And now you're tired. Not just tired, done. But here's the paradox. The ego dies screaming, not silently. It floods you with fear. Who will you be without me? What will they think? What if you disappear completely? It seduces you to go back to what's familiar, to reconstruct the image, to play it safe, to numb, distract, perform, again. But the truth is, it's already too late. You've seen too much, felt too much, questioned too deeply. You can't go back to pretending. And that is terrifying. Because what lies ahead is unknown. It's vast. It's wild. The ego hates that. It needs labels, certainty, identity. But your soul thrives in the unknown. It longs to move beyond the prison of image and control. This is the threshold, when the false self begins to dissolve, but the true self has not yet fully emerged. It feels like dying because it is a kind of death, the death of who you thought you had to be. But let me tell you this. On the other side of ego death is not emptiness. It's clarity. It's breath. It's freedom. So if you're lost right now, good. If you don't recognize yourself, good. If you can no longer tolerate the mask, very good. It means the process has begun. Let the ego breathe its last. Let the fear arise. Witness it. Feel it. Don't feed it. Don't follow it. You are not what is dying. You are what remains. And what begins to rise in this emptiness is something you may not expect. The reappearance of what you've buried. The feelings, truths, and desires you were once told to suppress. The return of the repressed. And that is what we will face next. Get ready. Have you ever felt an emotion surge through you so suddenly, so violently, that it frightened you? A wave of sadness, rage, shame, so intense it seemed to come from nowhere. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from you. From somewhere deep inside that you've spent your whole life avoiding. This is what happens when the ego begins to die. The things it kept locked away no longer stay quiet. Carl Jung called it the return of the repressed, the moment when your unconscious pushes everything you silenced back to the surface. Not to punish you, but to be seen. For years you've buried things. Childhood wounds, unmet needs, unspoken truths. The anger you never allowed yourself to feel. The grief you never gave yourself permission to process. The desires that didn't fit your image. The pain that was too inconvenient to carry. You buried them deep in the shadows of your psyche. But shadows don't disappear. They wait. And now, they're waking up. You might feel like you're unraveling, crying for no reason, snapping at people, feeling old memories like open wounds. But this is not regression. It's revelation. This is your soul emptying the basement. Every unhealed part of you is rising, not to destroy you, but to demand your attention. You were never meant to carry all this alone. But society taught you to smile, to achieve, to suppress. You were rewarded for self-denial, praised for self-sacrifice, and now your body, your heart, your spirit are revolting. You may want to numb it, medicate it, spiritualize it, rationalize it, but none of that works anymore. The unconscious doesn't respond to reason, it responds to truth. It only quiets when it is acknowledged, honored, integrated. This is where most people run. They say, I was doing fine, and then suddenly everything got worse. No, you weren't doing fine. You were functioning. There's a difference. What's rising now are the parts of you that still believe they're unworthy, unsafe, unseen. The child who was never comforted. The teenager who had to grow up too fast. The adult who abandoned themselves to be loved. They're not just memories. They're living energies in your psyche, trapped until now. And this mess, this flood, this emotional chaos is sacred. Because you cannot become whole by cutting off pieces of yourself. Integration is not selective. You must welcome it all. So cry, rage, shake, sit with it. Don't analyze. Don't judge. Just feel. You are not being broken. You are being returned to yourself. Jung taught that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. And this is exactly what's happening. The unconscious is knocking, not softly, but with force, because it's time. And what comes next is silence. But not emptiness. A different kind of silence. The kind that speaks. The kind that reveals. In the next chapter, we'll explore that silence, the stillness after the storm, the sacred pause where your true self begins to whisper back. Let's continue. Have you ever sat in complete silence and suddenly felt like the loudest voice was coming from inside you? Not the voice of thought or logic, but something older, softer, wiser. A voice that doesn't shout, but doesn't go away. That silence is not empty. It's waiting for you to listen. After the breakdown, after the ego's collapse, after the flood of repressed emotion, something strange happens. The noise dies, the chaos recedes, and in its place is stillness. Not peace exactly, but quiet. And for many, that's the most terrifying part. Because now there's no distraction left. No more roles to play, no more masks to hold up, just you, naked, undefined, suspended between the life you're shedding and the one that hasn't begun yet. This silence is not absence, it's presence, and it speaks. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He saw that in the stillness, when all the personas fall away, the true self begins to stir. It doesn't speak in language, it speaks in symbols, sensations, dreams, and deep intuitions. Most people miss it. They mistake it for loneliness, boredom, or depression. But it's none of those. It's the psyche creating space, making room for something new to emerge. But that emergence cannot be forced. It must be allowed. In this chapter of your inner journey, you are being asked to do something radically counterintuitive. Stop trying to fix yourself. Stop rushing to fill the void. Stop turning your pain into a project. Just be with what's here. Let the silence expand. Let it speak. And it will speak. You'll notice it in subtle ways. A sudden memory. A dream that shakes you. An inner knowing you can't explain. An urge to write, to walk, to weep, for no clear reason. Don't dismiss these things. This is your soul reintroducing itself. You may feel disconnected from the world. Friends may not understand you. You may not understand yourself. But this isolation is not exile. It's incubation. Something is forming, and it needs silence to do so. Jung believed that real transformation does not come from addition, but from integration. And silence is the womb of integration. In this space, your psyche begins weaving together all that was once fractured. The shadow, the pain, the insight, the intuition. All of it begins to find each other. You are not going backwards. You are being held in the stillness between death and rebirth. So don't rush. Don't fill the silence. Stay with it. Listen, feel, breathe. Something in you is slowly, quietly rebuilding, not as who you were, but as who you are becoming. And soon, you'll notice another shift. The things you used to chase will lose their grip on you. The old desires will begin to dissolve. Not because you've given up, but because they no longer define your worth. And that's where we're heading next, to the collapse of old desires and the birth of something real. Let's go deeper. Have you ever looked at something you once desperately wanted and wondered? Why? Not just why you wanted it, but why you gave so much of yourself to it, approval, success, admiration, control, only to find that it left you emptier than before. That moment is not failure, it's evolution. There comes a time in every deep transformation when the desires that once drove you begin to fall away. The goals you chased, the validation you craved, the image you built, they lose their grip. Not because they're inherently wrong, but because they're no longer yours. They were strategies for survival, not expressions of truth. Jung understood this collapse well. He saw that the ego, when disconnected from the deeper self, attaches to desires like lifelines. If I achieve this, I'll be safe. If I'm loved by them, I'll matter. If I appear strong, I won't be abandoned. But these are not desires. They are defenses disguised as dreams. And now, one by one, they're falling apart. You may feel unmotivated, apathetic, even depressed. This isn't laziness, it's detachment. What's leaving you is not passion, but illusion. The illusion that your worth lives in external outcomes. That if you just try harder, look better, please more people, everything will finally feel okay. But it never did it? That's because those desires weren't born from your soul. They were reactions to pain, to pressure, to programming. They were about becoming who you thought you needed to be, not who you are. And now that you're listening, your soul is reclaiming the mic. This collapse is essential, because the self cannot fully emerge while the ego is still clinging to old definitions of value. Jung believed that individuation, the path to becoming whole, requires a death of false goals. Not to strip you of joy, but to clear space for desire that is real. Desire that arises not from lack, but from essence. Not from fear, but from freedom. This is why your world feels emptier. Because you're no longer addicted to performance. You're no longer hypnotized by external measures of success. And that creates a terrifying but necessary silence. Who are you when you're no longer trying to prove anything? The answer won't come quickly. It will emerge slowly, like a new language forming in your bones. You'll begin to feel a different kind of pull toward what is authentic, nourishing, quietly powerful. You'll care less about being liked and more about being whole. You'll stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I want to give? And what arises from this collapse is sovereignty, inner authority, a voice that no longer echoes the world's demands, but speaks from your own center. And that voice is where we're going next. The beginning of true power. Have you ever heard yourself say yes when everything inside you screamed no? Have you ever betrayed your truth just to be chosen, quieted your soul just to avoid conflict? If so, you're not alone. But that version of you is dying, and what's being born is power. Not the kind of power that dominates or controls, but the kind of power that knows. Inner authority is not loud, it's grounded. It doesn't need approval to act or permission to exist. It simply is. And you are beginning to remember that it was always there. Carl Jung taught that when we reclaim what we've projected onto others, our power, our wisdom, our sense of direction, we begin the process of individuation. And that's exactly what's happening now. You're no longer outsourcing your truth. You're no longer looking outward for who you're allowed to be. You're looking in, and what you find there changes everything. For the first time, you begin to feel the difference between reaction and response, between instinct and integrity. You notice when you're slipping into old roles, when your yes is performative, when your silence is not peace, but fear. And you stop. You pause. You choose again. It may feel awkward at first, like speaking a forgotten language. You may tremble when you speak your truth. You may lose people. You may feel exposed. But that trembling, that is your old self unraveling, and your new self anchoring in. Inner authority is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to stop letting fear lead. It's the moment you say, I will disappoint others before I abandon myself again. And when you do that, when you speak your truth not with rage, but with clarity, you cross an invisible threshold. The world may not change, but you do. This is the birth of boundaries, not walls, but sacred lines drawn by self-respect. This is when your time, your energy, your attention are no longer for sale. This is when you stop being available to what drains you and start becoming magnetic to what aligns with you. And yes, there will be consequences. Some people won't like the new you, the version that doesn't overextend, apologize for existing, or water herself down. But this isn't pride. This is alignment. And alignment has a cost, but so does self-abandonment. Jung reminded us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege begins here, with the decision to trust your own voice over the noise of the world. You're no longer seeking power. You're inhabiting it. And when you do that, When you finally stand in your truth without flinching, the world will react. Not always kindly, not always fairly, but inevitably. And that's what we'll face next. The resistance from the outside. Let's keep going. Have you ever dared to change and suddenly felt punished for it? You speak your truth, you reclaim your time, you finally say no, and the world around you tightens. People pull away, conflicts rise, and you start to wonder, am I doing something wrong? No, you're doing something right. And the system around you is resisting. Change is never just personal. When you shift, everything connected to the old version of you is forced to adapt or fall away. And not everyone will be ready. Some were comfortable with the role you used to play, the fixer, the pleaser, the dependable one who stayed small so others could feel big. When you stop playing that part, their world shakes too. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming your whole self, creates tension, not just within, but without. As you integrate your shadow, reclaim your voice and embody your truth, your very presence becomes a disruption, a mirror, a challenge, and mirrors are rarely welcome. You might notice subtle forms of rejection, a friend who goes silent, a partner who becomes critical, a family member who calls you selfish. They're not evil, they're not villains, they're threatened. Not by who you are, but by what your authenticity reveals in them, the parts they've buried, the truths they refuse to face. You've become a living contradiction to their comfort. And in those moments, it's tempting to shrink again, to apologize, to explain, to soften your truth just enough to keep the peace. But remember, peace built on your silence is not peace, it's a performance. And you didn't come this far to lose yourself again. This is where inner authority is tested. Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what he didn't add is this. The second most terrifying thing is watching what happens when you actually do. You may feel lonely here, misunderstood, isolated, but this is not isolation, it's refinement. The shedding of false alliances, the breaking of unconscious contracts, the moment where only the true ones stay, and yes, some may go. Let them. Because your truth is not up for negotiation. Not anymore. This resistance is not a sign to stop. It's a sign you've started. It means your transformation is no longer internal, it's visible. And visibility threatens every system built on your invisibility. But something beautiful is happening beneath the tension. You're learning to hold your ground, to let people misunderstand you, to survive disapproval. And in that, you become unshakable. And yet, just when you think you're standing firm, a new test arises. The temptation to go back, to return to comfort, to abandon the path. That temptation is next. Have you ever felt the pull to go back to who you used to be, even after everything you've learned, everything you've survived? Not because it was better, but because it was easier, familiar, predictable. That pull is the final test. You've crossed thresholds. You've let go of illusions. You've begun to speak and live from truth. But just when you think the worst is over, something seductive whispers, come back. Back to pleasing. Back to performing. Back to hiding. Back to who they liked you as. Back to who you used to be before the pain woke you up. Carl Jung warned of this exact moment, the moment when the ego, threatened by real change, makes one last attempt to reassert control. It doesn't attack you directly. It seduces. It offers you comfort dressed in nostalgia. It wraps itself in old routines, old roles, old relationships, and says, wasn't it easier then? And in some ways, yes, it was. Because awakening is brutal. It burns. It isolates. It strips away everything that was false, and at first there is no replacement. Just space, silence, rawness. In that space, the temptation creeps in. You start to remember the good times, the easy connections, the simple answers. But memory is a liar when viewed through longing. You forget how small you had to be to fit, How much of yourself you had to deny just to belong. This is a spiritual relapse, the desire to return to unconsciousness. But here's what you must remember. Going back is not going home. It is exile in disguise. You are no longer the same. And the places, the people, the patterns you once tolerated will now feel toxic. Not because they changed, but because you did. So what do you do when the old world calls? You pause, you feel the ache, you honor the grief, and then you choose. Because this is a moment of choice, not punishment. You can return to safety, or you can remain on the path of soul, of individuation, of sacred uncertainty. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And yet that pain is the birthplace of freedom. Real freedom doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from no longer betraying yourself to escape it. So when that temptation whispers, "Just go back, it's too much," you whisper back, "I've come too far," and you keep walking. Because what lies ahead is not more collapse, but construction. The building of yourself. Not the borrowed self, not the adapted one, but the original blueprint your soul has always carried. And that blueprint begins to unfold in the next chapter, the fire of individuation. Let's step into it. Have you ever felt like everything inside you is burning? But for the first time, you're not afraid of the flames. You're not trying to escape. You're letting it burn. Because deep down, you know this fire isn't here to destroy you. It's here to reveal you. This is individuation. Carl Jung called it the process of becoming who you truly are, not what the world taught you to be, not what you shaped yourself into to survive, but who you were before the world got to you. And to get there, everything that is not truly you must fall away. Burn away, die. This is not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness is not perfection. It's integration. All the parts of you that were shamed, silenced, scattered, they begin to surface. Not for chaos, but for reintegration. The anger you buried, the fear you judged, the tenderness you hid, the creativity you dismissed. All of it wants to come home. And the fire is how you bring it back. But here's the catch. Individuation is not a peaceful process. It's a crucible. It will burn your pride. It will burn your certainty. It will burn your performance. It will burn every false identity you built just to feel safe. And it will leave you with you, raw, unfiltered, real. This fire doesn't destroy. It forges. It sharpens. It purifies. It reveals the diamond beneath the dust. And yet, most people will never enter it. Why? Because it requires you to walk alone, to face the shadow without flinching, to take radical responsibility for your inner world. No more blaming, no more hiding, no more waiting for rescue. You become both the wound and the healer, the question and the answer, the fire and what survives it. Jung said the most terrifying journey is the one into the self. Not because the self is monstrous, but because it is real. And reality burns through illusion. When you step into the fire of individuation, you stop looking for a savior. You stop needing to be fixed. You start realizing you were never broken, only fragmented. And every piece of you is now being called back. This process is not linear. There will be days you feel powerful and clear, and days when it all feels like too much. But the fire doesn't care about your convenience. It cares about your truth. You're not here to be who they expect you to be. You're here to become who you already are, and that self, the one rising from the ashes, begins to radiate a new kind of energy. One that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't bend. A silent, solid presence. And that's where we go next, the emergence of still power. Let's continue. Have you ever felt an unfamiliar strength rise in you? Not loud, not aggressive, but steady. A kind of quiet knowing that doesn't need to convince, doesn't need to chase, doesn't need to prove. That's not ego. That's essence. That is still power. After the fire of individuation, something profound begins to take shape. You no longer feel the need to be right. You don't need to win every argument. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Because now, you've touched something deeper, the part of you that simply is. Carl Jung said that we reach real maturity when we no longer identify with the mask. And here, in this silence after the storm, your mask has already burned. What remains is clarity, not the kind you get from thinking, but from being. You start to feel the ground beneath your own soul. Still power doesn't react. It chooses. It's not cold. It's composed. It's not passive. It's precise. You no longer flinch when someone doesn't like you. You no longer spiral when things fall apart. You no longer try to fix what was never yours to carry. This isn't apathy. This is alignment. Because now your energy, your psychic energy, as Jung would call it, is no longer scattered. It's not spent on performance, on people-pleasing, on pretending. It returns home. And that return changes everything. You start to walk differently, not faster, not harder, just with presence. Your words soften, but your boundaries sharpen. You don't seek attention, and yet your presence commands it. Not because you're louder, but because you are anchored. This is the paradox of true strength. It appears still on the outside, but it's forged in the deepest fires on the inside. And now others begin to feel it. They don't know what changed, but something in you no longer negotiates with what drains you. You've stopped being available to chaos. You've stopped being addicted to reaction. You've stopped being controlled by urgency. You've returned to center. And that center is now your compass. But don't be mistaken. This is not the end of resistance. In fact, your new energy will trigger the old world. Because when you stop reacting, people lose control over you. And when people lose control, they often push harder. But now, you're no longer hooked, no longer easily pulled. And that frustrates those who were used to your emotional obedience. Your stillness disrupts their dynamic. This is the gift and the cost of still power. You're no longer moving from fear. You're moving from awareness. And from that awareness, something else begins to happen. Your inner life becomes your outer life. The alignment becomes visible, tangible, embodied. And that's what we'll explore next. The inner life becomes the outer life. Let's go there. Have you ever woken up one day and realized your outer world no longer fits your inner truth? Not because something went wrong, but because something went right. You've changed, and now life must catch up to who you've become. This is the moment when what was once invisible begins to take form. After the fire, after the stillness, after the slow rising of inner power, you begin to notice that your choices, your boundaries, your presence are no longer just internal states. They're shaping reality. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that privilege carries a responsibility to live in alignment with that truth. Not just in solitude, not just in meditation, but in action, in relationship, in life. And so your environment starts to shift, not because you're reinforcing it, but because you no longer compromising your center to keep it intact. The friendships that once drained you begin to fade. The work that once defined you now feels lifeless. The spaces where you used to shrink now feel intolerable. You're not burning bridges. You're just no longer building them from self-abandonment. And in that space, something new begins to take root. People who resonate with your essence start appearing. Opportunities align without force. Your no becomes sacred. Your yes becomes rare. You move slower. With more intention, you stop performing, and you start embodying. This is where the internal architecture becomes visible. It's not about perfection. It's about congruence. The same you that speaks in solitude now speaks in public. The same boundaries you set in your mind now shape your relationships. The same clarity you felt in the fire now guides your direction, and it changes everything. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What aligns with who I am becoming?" You stop seeking validation because your actions are no longer up for vote. You stop trying to control outcomes because you trust your energy to lead the way. You've become the cause, not the effect. And yes, it can feel strange at first. Peace can feel like boredom. Wholeness can feel empty. You're so used to striving that stillness feels unnatural. But don't mistake unfamiliar for wrong. This is the beginning of embodiment. You're not seeking life anymore. You're living it, from the inside out. But before you settle into this new alignment, there's one final realization. This isn't the end of your journey. It's the threshold of a much deeper one. And in the final chapter, we'll uncover what that really means. The beginning of the real journey. Let's finish strong. Have you ever reached a point you once prayed for, only to realize it's not a destination, but a doorway? You've shed the masks, faced the shadows, stood in the fire, and now you are more yourself than you've ever been. But what if I told you, this is where the real journey begins? The path to self is not a straight line. It loops, it deepens, it humbles. And just when you think you've arrived, something quieter, deeper, and far more sacred begins to stir. The truth that you are not here to become someone else. You are here to remember what you've always been. Carl Jung taught that individuation is not a final state, but a process. A living, breathing conversation between your conscious and unconscious self. It's not about finding answers that silence the soul. It's about living into questions that awaken it. It's not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming real. And being real means continuing to choose presence, even when it's inconvenient. To speak truth, even when it shakes your voice. To hold boundaries, even when they cost you company. To live in alignment, even when no one is watching. That's the real work. Not the breakthrough, but the embodiment. Not the collapse, but the rebuilding. Not the fire, but the consistency with which you carry its warmth forward into your daily life. This is the sacred monotony of real transformation. Showing up, staying centered, returning to yourself again and again and again. There will be moments where the old world calls you back, where loneliness echoes louder than peace, where discomfort tempts you to perform again. But now, you know too much. You feel the difference. And you have a choice. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." So don't resist your cycles. Don't fear your shadow when it reappears. You're not failing. You're spiraling upward. Each return is deeper. Each silence, more spacious. Each fire, more refining. And here lies the truth no one tells you. The best stage of your life is not one where everything is finally perfect. It's the one where you stop abandoning yourself, where your life becomes your own, where peace is not circumstantial but internal, where freedom is no longer theoretical but embodied. This is not the end. This is integration in motion. This is awareness becoming a way of being. This is the beginning of the real journey. So now I ask you, will you keep going? Because true transformation doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in your moment-to-moment choices. Are you ready to lose others in order to stop losing yourself? Because choosing your peace is not selfish, it's sacred. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. It's important. You need to keep going. Real transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. See you there.